Welcome to Savvy Business, Life Unscripted, with your host, Christina Rivera, where our guests share their wisdom and valuable business tips, empowering our audience to expand their personal potential.
Hi, Britt Frank. Welcome to Savvy Broadcasting, Life Unscripted, for our release, Unleash Your Story. We're so grateful to have you here today. You're going to share your latest book, The Science of Stuck: Breaking Through Inertia to Find Your Path Forward, which I'm sure a lot of folks can relate to, being a lot of people have felt really super stuck the past 2 years with all the craziness going on. And I know you're going to help them.
So it's so wild because I started writing this book before the pandemic. So the genesis of this idea came from being stuck in addictions and being stuck with some, my personal crazy making stuff. And then throughout the duration of the pandemic, obviously stuck turned into a whole new, that word took on a whole new life. And again, I don't think that the pandemic is good. And I don't like everything happens for a reason is not my orientation. However, we're allowed to talk about mental health in a way that we really weren't pre-pandemic. And so I'm so excited that the book, The Science of Stuck, is now accessible in a way that prior to the pandemic might have been really squished into a narrow box of, I don't have mental health issues. That's just, if you survive the pandemic, if you're here, you have trauma. We are, as a global community, working through something brand new. So yay, we can talk about it now.
Yeah, and I love that you say that, because it's always been taboo to talk about any issues you might be having. And people assume mental health means like you're on the total spectrum where you need to be in a hospital or something. And there's many levels of mental health and maybe mental disease and stuff. You're a therapist, teacher, and speaker, and trauma specialist.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't think, well, I had a traumatic thing happen. I just let it go in the past. I don't want to dwell on it. But sometimes in order to go forward, you need to deal with it.
Yes. And I have clients, I have a private practice. So clients will come to me this year and say, I just feel so stuck. Why can't I do the things I want to do? I wanted to launch this business, but I don't have any trauma. So what's my problem? Like, you have 3 kids and you lived through the 2020. Like, sorry, you may have had a great childhood, but you have trauma. Trauma being defined as anything that exceeds our brain's ability to process and metabolize, which really can be anything. It doesn't have to be a high level, what we think of: abuse, assault, war. Trauma is like brain indigestion. Anything that exceeds our capacity to digest will land in the body as trauma, which means lots of uncomfortable body sensations and feeling crazy and feeling like I can't do what I want to do. But it's not a crazy issue.
Yeah, I like that we're going there, because there are different levels of being in this space. It doesn't have to be, as you say, you've had a horrible trauma where you're raped or something horrible like that. It could just be, as you say, your brain's just not able to process what's going on. And who could? This has been nutty the past 2 years. It's been changing people's. And here's a good thing, though. Tell me about your perspective. Because things have been turned upside down on its head, it's also allowed people, if they have the space, to kind of slow down and say, okay, this has turned me on my head. How can I look at this in a way that can push me forward in a bigger way and help me to accomplish a greater potential in myself?
I love that you named that. And again, it's not this toxic positivity of, yay, this is great, but it's, what is it? Newton's first law of motion, that an object in motion will stay in motion. That's true with habits too. Our lifestyle, our routines tend to get into motion and just sort of float us out into these lives unless something changes it. And the pandemic, if nothing else, certainly broke open our loop of habitual autopilot pattern, just doing our thing. And now we do have the opportunity, assuming, and my caveat is always, assuming you have a safe enough place to live and you have your basic needs met and access to resources, which not everybody does, but assuming you have a few choices, now is a great time to really reconfigure things, because we're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
People who don't have friends, I'm like, great, everyone's isolated and lonely, and the pandemic highlighted we all need friends. Cool. So now we're all in the boat of let's go out and meet each other. And we're all in that same mindset, which we weren't before.
Yeah, and the good point is that a lot of times you might have been, I was told by a lot of people in the industry of a lot of authors and a lot of business owners were telling me that they were on a plane a lot, traveling a lot, not spending time with family. Well, now it's like, well, I have no choice but to spend time with family and maybe watch a little bit of Netflix. It allowed that time to slow down and also to say what's important to me. Because I think when you're on that road of just move, 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 you forget what is really important to me and how do I want to see my life going forward.
Which for some people, the time to slow down really highlighted how wonderful their marriages are and how beautiful their families are. And the dark side of that story, which is true for a lot of people, is slowing down brought to the surface how not okay things are. And there was nowhere to run and we couldn't escape in our jobs or in our busyness.
Yeah.
And so highlighting all of the gunk that was under, someone asked me, do you think the pandemic made mental health worse? I said, no, I think it just highlighted what was already there, but we do a bang up job avoiding our realities. And of course, it certainly made some people in some cases worse. But by and large, the pandemic brought up whatever was true for you is now true amplified. So if it was good, it's awesome. And if it wasn't good, oh my God, what do we do? But either way is a great opportunity for reflection and reconfiguring and actually choosing our life instead of living in reactivity and defaults.
Ooh, I love that. Choosing your life instead of living in a default. Prior, I love my work life and my family life, but being the constant moving person of, building my business or doing this podcast even, I didn't really put my health at all on the equation and told myself there's not any time really for me to do much exercising or change how I'm eating because I'm just so busy. But of course that did change for me during the last 2 years because I was kind of like when, as you said, you kind of were having to deal with things that you were maybe putting off to the side and not wanting to deal with. And it became a great time for me to change some habits.
And again, it's a great time to change, but it's also important for people who haven't been able to change habits to really give themselves not a pass, not justification, but a lot of, okay, look at the ecosystem right now. If you're not, changing your life and baking banana bread and learning a new language, like that's okay. So it's really, as people are setting goals and setting intentions, for whatever, to start with what's a reasonable expectation of myself, and I think the number one contributor to people letting their goals fall off or not, doing the things that they want to do and being stuck is that they're not setting reasonable. And again, it doesn't mean you should give yourself a pass to do nothing. Yeah. It means whatever your environment is demanding of you, are your goals in alignment with that reality? And if they're not, you're not going to meet them. And that's not your fault. Like that's not because you have a defect or because you're not capable. It's let's set goals that match our environment. And then as that changes, our goals can change.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember years ago, I was getting started with an exercise program and it was so hard. I couldn't it was like a 50-minute program videotape at the time. And I was like, I couldn't get past 10 minutes. And you could totally get to the point where, well, it's not working and just stop because the 50 minutes is just too hard for where I was starting from. And so you just throw away the goal. And I came back to the tape and decided I'm just going to do 10 minutes a day until I can handle a little bit more. And within a couple months, I could do the 50 minutes. But it was allowing myself to set up a smaller goal that didn't make me feel like I was going to lose right off the bat.
Yes. And not just allowing ourselves the smaller goals, but celebrating them. I have to push, of all of the things I do in my practice, I have to challenge people really hard and give them a lot of neuroscience to back up why celebrating those small goals is important. So it's not only give yourself permission to do 10 minutes, it's then after you do the 10 minutes or the 2 minutes or the 30 seconds, do a dance, turn on some music and celebrate. Because what that does, celebrating will actually prime your pump. Celebrating tells your brain, oh, whatever that thing was that we just did, let's do more of that. But if you make yourself do 10 minutes and then you say, oh, it's only 10 minutes, what is it? Then your brain's going to go, oh, whatever we just did was bad. Don't do that again. And so celebrating is a brain hack that can help us. So whatever teeny tiny little micro step you can get, celebrate it, and those will compound, and then you can get more of them. And then those small changes turned into transformations over time.
I love it. It's kind of like compound interest in your bank account. I love that. And many years ago, I remember my dance teacher had said to me when I was doing a bit, and I had a lot of trouble. I'm not in any shape or form good at dancing, but I would end and go like, okay, tell me all my mistakes. He's like, let's look at the things you did right instead of let's just look at your mistakes. So I think we can tend to look at what we do wrong or not get right instead of, as you say, let's celebrate the small wins. What did we get right today that we can celebrate?
Yes. And then the pushback I get on that is, well, okay, so you're celebrating, but you're just, what about the stuff you're doing wrong? And it's like, okay, fine. Let's make space for, if there are things that I'm not doing well or that I'm not skillful at, I will allow that it's like, what's the reality of my situation? Yeah. If I'm going to look at my situation with an honest lens and do an inventory, I'm going to have things I'm doing well and things I could do better. Yeah. So let's just start with what we're doing well. It's not at the expense of the other stuff. It's once you get the dopamine hit from, wow, I do a few things well, that dopamine hit will help you to go over to where things are a little bit stickier. So it's not one or the other. It's both and start with celebrating so you can do the harder stuff.
Yeah. And I like that you say, start with celebrating instead of just beating yourself up and say, okay, here's what we can celebrate. Today we did 10 minutes of exercise as opposed to nothing. And okay, now what else can we look at? Okay, what am I eating? Perhaps I could, and here's the part that's really hard when it comes to stuff like that. You're like, oh, I've heard people say, if you get rid of something, you're just going to crave it, a bad behavior, or in a case of a bad food, perhaps, or not so good food, unless you replace that habit or behavior with something more positive, you're just going to be wanting to crave that. What's your take on that?
So I'm not a nutritionist or dietitian, but I think there's enough research to show that, people who restrict their diet, and as somebody who had a bunch of eating disorders, I can say the more restrictive that I got with the way I ate, the more out of control the behavior was. But regardless of how you do the behavior management strategies, if you don't understand that there's a need driving your dive into the Ben and Jerry's every night, you can replace it with banana yogurt or whatever the heck people are doing to fake ice cream nowadays. But that's not going to solve the pain problem. You've now shifted a behavior, but I promise you, if there's untended pain, that habit that you've just managed is going to pop out sideways, and it's going to be another behavior or a symptom or some other way of being in the world that feels uncomfortable. So we need to address the function.
That is a really great point to go to, because I remember many years ago, and I've said this on my podcast before, I had gone through a horrible breakup, and my way to handle it was like buy the store out and crazy debt. So so you could go, okay, I won't do that behavior, but we'll go to Ben and Jerry. Both not the best behavior for yourself. So how do you go and work through pain if you're now beginning to realize, okay, I've got this pain going on, I've now identified it. How do we begin to work through it?
I love that question because it's such a more compassionate question. So, okay, so let's take a food binge issue. So whatever the thing is, whether it's heroin or Ben and Jerry's or shopping, it doesn't matter. We have to start by just assume you're not going to kick this habit today. How can we start by minimizing the damage? Harm reduction. So again, harm reduction looks different depending on what your thing is. But if it's causing you medical harm, can you medically intervene? If it's causing you social harm, how can we put some parameters around the behavior so we can at least minimize the harm that you're doing? Okay. Once we have that in place, because everyone's like, I just need to stop. I'm like, great. You're not going to today. Yeah. So maybe you binge on the pint instead of the gallon. Okay. That's where we start. Again, it's not justifying it. It's just saying, how can we reduce the impact that this behavior is going to have? One. Then number two, let's be willing to get curious. Most people are in a very well-intended effort to get to the solution, bypass the function. And so you have to be willing to get curious about the function. And then step three is, okay, now let's dig and find out.
Now, the function would be how you look at it and the action you're going to take, the new action. What is okay.
The function meaning I'm sad over my breakup and ice cream feels good, or, I'm sad because I lost my job and my dog and everything is going to pieces. And so drugs. So, again, it's not justifying it. It's this behavior is serving me in some way. Doesn't mean it's a good thing. It just means it is serving you. All behavior serves a function or we wouldn't do it. That's not how our brains are organized. So then we can get to what's our strategy for change. But that is not the first step. As a productive, like type A, let's figure out a plan and go get it done. I'm so sorry that our brains are designed in a way that we have to identify, and not for every single thing. So you don't have to dig deep for everything. But if you have a really compulsive, deep-seated habit that you've had for years, behavior modification will get you there, but it's really hard to sustain. That's more of a white knuckling. I'm just going to stay away from the ice cream versus I understand where that behavior came from. I'm willing to tend to it. And now I can substitute it with something that'll meet the actual need.
Wow. This is really fascinating. I remember a number of years ago, I would get really frustrated because I would work really late hours back in corporate, like every single day. And I find that, my bosses I felt not rewarding me. And in one case, because they had to cut from every department, they cut me. And I took it personally. And I remember someone saying to me, well, are you taking it personally because there's something else going on behind it? And because I had a bit of time before I got another job, what I did, I sat down and I journaled, and I realized it's because I had this kind of people-pleasing thing. Like I wanted to make everyone happy. So the staying late every day wasn't because I was the best damn employee ever, which I do like to be. It was really that I wanted people to like me and I wanted to please them. So there was something behind it that I got to. And so I think that's what you're referring to.
Yes. And it's, the shame thing is really tough because it can be so shameful to admit, oh my gosh, I'm getting something out of this behavior.
Yeah.
It's really shameful for me, or it was when I was working my program, to be like, wow, I did drugs. And a large function of that behavior was I didn't want to deal with some realities about myself that were really unpleasant, or the harm that I caused. I just wanted to stay numb. So if we can take the shame thing out of the equation and know that shame will put us into complete immobility. So if shaming ourselves worked, we'd all be good to go and I wouldn't have a job. So just from a pragmatic point of view, let's try, maybe not justifying, but putting aside the shame. Because I think people in their effort to take account, which is good, to take accountability for themselves, which yay, you can take accountability and be responsible for your choices without shaming yourself and without beating yourself up. And so I think if we can get the shame out of the way, then we can admit, okay, I'm a people pleaser. That's what this is. Okay, I know that's my thing. Oh, not my best look, but okay, what can we do about it now?
Yeah.
But we need to find safe spaces and safe people, or safe enough to be able to say, okay, here's actually what I'm really doing.
Yeah. And really, I think it's useful in so much shame that you notice, okay, I feel shame and here's why. Now let it go. And instead of holding on to it, I think it's as useful for just that purpose, just to notice, okay, here's where my issue is. Now let's just move on from it. Now I see what the function is I'm getting from a certain behavior. And now I can start to bring about better behaviors for myself.
And here's and I agree with you. And here's the rub with that though, right? Because shame also serves a function. I'm with you. If you feel shame, yay, I'm not a sociopath because I have the capacity to feel ashamed of my behavior. And now what do I need to do to move on? But if we stay locked down in shame, and this one is so icky, but it's true. If I'm just in a swirl of my own badness, it's sort of like a reverse self-centered, self-focused thing. I'm so concerned with my badness that I can't take the actions that I need to take to do a repair, because doing a repair is really awful and feels really gross, or making an amends or changing a behavior. Shame is awful, but it too can become a suboptimal but very functional way of avoiding ourselves. So even shame can be a way that we avoid stuff, which is weird.
Yeah, that kind of procrastinating thing. Yeah, that we got. This has been fascinating. There's so much to go into, and I know your book goes way deeper, The Science of Stuck. Where can people get a copy, find out more about you? How can they do that?
Thank you so much. This went fast. I could go on for hours. So you can buy the book, The Science of Stuck, wherever books are sold, and you can find me on Instagram at Britt Frank, or my website, scienceofstuck.com.
Awesome. Well, Britt Frank, I just have to thank you again for coming to Savvy Broadcasting tonight and sharing your great wisdom. I do hope it helps anyone out there who is feeling stuck begin to look at what's going on and look at different functions and go past it, and best year ever. So I thank you so much, Britt.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.
Like, subscribe, and share this episode. To listen to more savvy episodes and savvy biz tips, go to www.lifeunscriptedradio.com. To find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest, email Christina at lifeunscriptedradio.com.